And when we got back, we were sitting in our house. He had to go back to his foster family the next day. And I kind of said to him, "What did you think of the trip? Did you have a lot of fun?" And he said, "Yeah, I had so much fun." And I said, "Well, what if we were your forever family? What if you lived with us forever?" And he was like, "Yes, yes, yes, I want to live with you
Oh.
forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever." And Dylan, I just looked at each other and we were just, kind of both teared up like, okay, this is it then.
Welcome to the Voices of OUTCAN podcast. Join Military Family Services US as we explore the experiences our Canadian Armed Forces families have while on OUTCAN. Leaving your home to live in another country can be an exciting adventure, but it is also a time filled with unexpected challenges. Get a glimpse into the CAF OUTCAN world with these unique stories of resiliency and courage. Share in their struggles and cheer for their triumphs. Here are the voices of our OUTCAN families. Welcome to episode 1 of 2 episodes where we will be sharing stories of 2 families who adopted while OUTCAN. I'm your host, Joanna Church. Please note that MFS US does not endorse or promote OUTCAN adoptions and is not able to provide guidance or support to a family choosing to foster or adopt. These 2 special episodes are to highlight 2 families who made this decision and journey on their own. Did you know that November is Adoption Awareness Month? Adoption from foster care is a topic that is near to my heart. During our OUTCAN to Whidbey Island, Washington, from about 2010 to 2014, my husband, Sean, a sonar operator with the Navy, and myself got our foster care license and adopted our son, Dion, who was 15 at the time. It was a roller coaster journey that felt like we were forging a path through a wilderness. Every official we spoke to in both the US and Canada said they had never had anyone request to do this between the 2 countries. And figuring out all of the steps and forms and letters and legal documents to get it done so that our son could come back to Canada with us, well, it was an all-consuming year. But I do sit here back in Canada now with a 23-year-old son who has dual citizenship and lives just a few minutes away from us. Little did I know that all that effort would help other CAF families figure out foster care adoption while OUTCAN as well. Over the next 2 weeks, we will be sharing 2 families' OUTCAN adoption stories. Military families are in a unique position to understand and support kids who have been moved numerous times over their short lives. But often, our CAF families in Canada, moving every few years themselves, find that it's difficult to have the time to complete the necessary programs to be foster families, let alone adopt within those current provincial policies. My 2 guest families are going to share why they decided to adopt older kids from foster care while on OUTCAN and how that journey is going for them today. First, I want to welcome Chris Brady, who is currently located in Colorado for an OUTCAN posting with her husband Dylan, a Lieutenant Commander Naval Intel Officer, and their 4 kids, Charlie and James, age 9, Fiona, age 7, and Etta, who is 4. This is a family who is no stranger to the highs and lows and frequent moves of the military life. In the 13 years Chris and Dylan have been together, there has been Halifax, a 10-month separation when Dylan was in Afghanistan and Chris was in England teaching, then Halifax again, Ottawa, and now Colorado. Wow, that is a decade of movement. Hearing that, I know there must be people listening who are wondering, how did you ever find time to adopt? Because most people hear stories about how it can take years. And we are going to talk about that in a minute. But let's go back a little farther in time. You had said to me that it was on your heart to adopt since you were in high school. So, Chris, what happened in high school that even made you start to consider adoption as an option for your life?
Yeah, so thanks very much for having me. This is also a topic very dear, and I'm so glad that you're covering it for this month. Nothing actually happened in high school. It was actually my parents divorced when I was 5. And when that happened, we actually moved in with my grandma, my mom, and 4 kids. And my grandma really basically was 90% of the person who raised me, because my mom was working in a factory, and there was a lot going on at the time. And so for me, adoption, I felt very adopted by her, just welcomed into her family. And we really didn't have anywhere else to go at the time, and it just it felt like something that I could do too. And my grandma meant so much to me, and I knew that I could probably bring this into someone else's life when I got older. So that was the real that was the influence.
That's actually something that I have heard in the past. People who have had an experience where they were either adopted or felt adopted by
Mhm.
someone, and that put it on their heart to start. I think you're not alone in that being sort of the start of the motivation that got you there. When you and Dylan got together and you had the discussion with him about your desire to adopt, how did he respond to that? What were his thoughts?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, initially we were friends for about 5 years before that. And so we had talked about different things about, when we wanted a family, and both of us weren't really keen on having children at all at that time. And so I think for him, more, I think it was kind of like, oh, yeah, yeah, that's one of those things that people talk about, but they don't do. And I think initially that was probably what he was thinking, was that, this is something that was nice to talk about, but I'm not sure that she's really going to go through with this. And I really, at the time, I knew how difficult it was to adopt, and the length of time it took. And so it wasn't on the horizon immediately. We had a very major discussion when we were trying for our second child, and I wasn't getting pregnant. And that's when we really started saying, okay, we definitely want at least a second. So this might be an avenue that we need to start looking into. And so we did that in Canada. And then 2 months later, I got pregnant with my second child. And so we just didn't do it at that time.
I think what you were saying, a lot of people experience that
Hmm.
desire. They
Hmm.
have that desire and they have the conversation to adopt or to look into adoption. And usually, what I've found is they get to that point of actually looking into it and they feel overwhelmed by that process
Yeah. Yeah.
because it is a time consuming process, especially if you're a military family, knowing that you're on a time crunch
Hmm.
because maybe you're going to be moving. And yet, I feel like once you look into it, it seems upfront like a lot, but by the end of it, you're like, wow, that really wasn't as bad
Yeah,
as I
absolutely.
thought it was going to be.
Absolutely.
So, as you were going through all of these moves and having 3 birth children and building your very successful career, did you ever think that your dream of adoption might be out of reach because of all of those moves?
Yeah, definitely. We actually talked about possibly one day, when the kids are a bit older, and they're in their teens, kind of thing, that we would do fostering, and possibly not adopt, but just try the fostering, because that's kind of where it felt like we would have to go. Just wait another decade or so and then, just open our home up to foster children instead of adopting. Yeah, absolutely.
It can be overwhelming, especially when we know, "Oh, I'm moving again in a
Yeah,
year."
yeah.
Well, I remember when you reached out to me to ask questions, and that was
Mhm,
back
yeah.
years ago now. I'd like you to tell me about the night that you found out that you could adopt while you were in the United States. How did your OutCan adoption journey start?
Yeah, it was kind of a whirlwind, to be quite honest. It was not something that was on our mind. We had been living here, and the prospect of adopting outside of Canada was not even an idea for me. I didn't realize that I even could. And we were actually, Dylan and I went to a work party of his, and we got talking to this other military couple who, Dylan had said, yeah, they adopted here? And I was like, no, they didn't. There's no way. And he said, yeah, let's, do you want to talk to them about it? And so I spent, the next little while kind of just asking this couple all about, how did they do it? What agency did they go through? How much did it cost? How long was it? Because, we only had, less than 2 years here to get all of that done. And what kind of paperwork do they need for filing, for Canadian citizenship and all of this other stuff. And they were amazing. They were so calm, cool, and collected about everything. They, just very matter of factly set out, the steps that they took, the agency they went through, and made it feel just so possible, because they just said, yeah, it was actually, a lot easier than we thought. And so I contacted the agency the very next morning and said, we've heard about you through this couple, and I'm just wondering if you have any training or any time to talk. And within 2 weeks, we had started the training. And it was just kind of like, we're going to just throw ourselves into this because we can actually do this here. We can actually do it in the time frame that we have. So let's make this happen while we can.
Share with us the process that your family then had to go through in the state of Colorado. And for anyone listening, it's just like in Canada, depending on the state, depending on the province, there are some slightly different steps that you may have to take. So what she's going to be sharing may not be the case in your location, but what was sort of the step-by-step process of getting you to that point of getting your license?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to make sure I get everything in. So we had kind of like an orientation where they go, we went into the agency, and there were about 5 other couples who were also going to be going through the training with us, and not couples, single women as well, who had adopted in other states and were now here and decided that's what they wanted to do here as well. And so really, a very diverse types of families, and from all over the place. This agency is very well known. And so the training was, I believe it was 8 or 9 weeks. I'm not exactly sure. But we would basically go every Wednesday night, and they would kind of take us through various topics concerning, trauma, and just some of the expectations around what you think adoption is going to be like, especially if you're adopting an older child, and what it actually is like. It was really great. We met our case manager. She was amazing, and just, very ready and willing to answer any questions. We went through there's online training that you have to do as well within 1 year of concluding your in-class training. And these are all topics you can choose, the different topics. So if you know that you want an older child, and your child maybe has some different difficulties, they have classes for that in the online training. So that was really helpful as well. And then there's the home inspection. And so they come into your home and they make sure there's, different rules around sharp objects that need to be locked away, different things like anything that you can consume that is toxic. So laundry detergents, dishwashing liquids, really anything. We had little tackle boxes basically with tiny little locks on them. It cost us next to nothing. I bought most of it at Goodwill, and just had them throughout the house. Like at first we were like, oh, this is, so difficult. It was nothing. We got so used to it that it took us a while after the adoption to even change back to the old way and put the knives back in the drawers. But, just safety precautions. And then they ask you a bunch of questions as an individual and a couple. How were you raised? What is your motivation for wanting to adopt? And these are all really great questions, because, sometimes the motivation is not the greatest motivation to adopt. So that's good that they ask that. It's also good that they ask about your own childhood, so that they can get an understanding of, what were some of the difficulties in being raised, and how do you want to be different in the raising of your own child, because there are difficulties that will come along with this. Yeah, I
I
think,
found that process very almost like marriage counseling
yeah,
too.
yeah,
I mean, they really get in
they
depth
do. Yeah,
to your relationship.
yeah.
How will you parent? How will you discipline?
Hmm.
Just to get candid, what is your sex life
Yes,
like? I mean, they
absolutely.
really get into some very in-depth things, and And they need to, because we
Yeah.
don't know the background of the child that might be coming into your home, and they
Yeah.
wanna have a big picture of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, we've all experienced different types of parenting ourselves. And, whether we like to admit it or not, we do have a default mode of parenting. And, it's good to understand that, because if you have a child that's coming in, and you think, oh, I can take on any behavior issues. Well, that might not be the case, actually. And you might want to adjust that based on some of the difficulties that you had when you were being parented, because we really have to be honest when it comes to how we currently are able to parent. If we're struggling with our children that we already have, and if we're struggling with our marriage, it's really great that they ask these questions, because you need to be as clear as possible so that this child does actually get the best home for them.
And then at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the parts of the process that she was describing was having to get certain items for your home, change certain things around your home, have a bedroom set up a certain way in your home.
Mhm.
Now, you used an agency in the state of Washington. My husband and I just went right through the state. So I don't know about the cost for you, but for us, the cost was nothing. And
Yeah.
that's another big misconception that people have, that to adopt from foster care is like adopting a baby. And
Mhm.
adopting babies is extremely expensive, tens of thousands of dollars. But when you adopt a child from the foster care system, they will cover everything. They will help you get something. If you need a bed, they will help you get that bed.
Yes.
And even if you do have to pay for some coursing out of pocket at the beginning, it does get reimbursed to you. So really, the finances of that should never be a barrier if it's on your heart to adopt. Did you
That's
find that was the
absolutely,
case
yes.
through the caseworker there?
Yes, that's absolutely true. We paid nothing. I think the only thing we ended up paying, there was a $30 application fee, which we couldn't believe that that was the only thing. And then at the very end, the lawyer fee, I think, went over by $200. And that was literally it. And throughout that year too, part of the process is that they want to make sure that you feel supported. And so they're coming in to check on you every month. They're coming in with little play dates at different, like, indoor gyms where we could bring our other children as well. And they would actually provide childcare for all the children. And we would go into a training session for whatever the topic was that month. And so it was just constantly making sure that you had what you needed. We had different lawyers who would come in and talk about the legal aspects of things. For all of the knowledge and just the support that you felt, the cost is unbelievable. I think that is the biggest barrier, is this assumption that it's the same as adopting internationally, or it's not. It's literally nothing at all. That, yeah, money should never ever be the barrier there.
And on OutCan, of course, when they do security checks, you probably are going to have to get a security check for back in Canada and a
Hmm.
security check for the United States too. So, I mean,
Yeah,
these are all steps. Like, it seems like a lot of steps, but at the end of it, they're steps that make sense. They don't
I
take
do.
up
Yeah.
a crazy amount of time. They really can fit right within your daily schedule.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, your kids. What did your kids think about all of this? I mean, 2 weeks after discovering you could potentially foster and adopt in the United States, you're in classes. How did you talk to your kids about this? How did those discussions go?
At first, I think we would always talk about how we can help other people. We are so lucky to have been born in the country that we're born into, and the family that we're born into, and all of this luck, and other kids are not so lucky. And they didn't really understand that until we started having the conversations about some of these children. And with my oldest at the time, I felt it really was important to involve her in showing her, these are some of the children that don't have a family, because they don't really connect with it unless they have a visual of it. And this was really big for her. She loved the idea of helping, but she really didn't understand just how difficult some of these lives had been for these children, because you can't fathom that at that age. And so it's opened up so many other discussions. And my kids, it's really like it makes me tear up, honestly, because
Mm.
they have conversations about things that they would have never had conversations about. When they're playing together, they play adoption, and where they have this adoptive families, and it's such a different experience than what they would have had we not done this. And they're so much more aware of what's actually going on in the world. That's really important to me, for my kids to have a really good grasp of reality. They've struggled, they've had their fights, they've had definitely some difficulties around the needs that our child needed in that moment. When we first brought the child into our home, there was a little bit of, well, I want more time with mom and dad. But then you get to have that conversation of, this is why, and this is what I need you to understand. And it's amazing how resilient our kids are, and that we don't understand, or we don't give them credit enough for just how much they actually do understand, and they want to understand, and they want to open up their hearts to the possibility of doing this. It's been amazing for our family in that way.
Which really brings us to the time that everyone's been waiting for. Tell us about the child that came into your lives through adoption.
Yeah, so it wasn't as easy as we thought. We kind of, and by easy, we kind of just thought we would look at these different children, which is, it's a very awkward process. It's something that you've never experienced before, because we had looked into adoption back in Canada when we were trying for our second child. We did kind of have an understanding that it's kind of like looking through a catalog of children, and it's very difficult to do that. It's very sad, but it's part of the process that you have to go through. When we were doing that, at the time we had 3 girls, and everyone thought, oh, you're gonna adopt a boy, right? And we didn't care at all. And so we put in for everyone and anyone who would take us. Like, we didn't have a lot of stipulations. Because of my background, we were looking at children with various learning difficulties and neurological differences and behavioral difficulties. We really didn't care. Our age range was 4 all the way up to 15, and gender that wasn't even on our mind. And so we did have a couple of children who, we thought we were going to get, and then we didn't. And we were
Which is a
never.
heartbreaking process.
It is. It is. It can be very difficult, but they weren't placed into our home and then taken out, right? It was something like, we're looking at your family. Your family looks like the best fit for this child or these children. We did have a brother and sister at one point, and then you kind of get it in your head that you're going to be that family for them, and then you're not, and they move on with a different family, and so you're kind of like, well, that sucks, and what's wrong with us?
The social workers are really trying to find that best fit. And
Yeah,
so you
yeah.
just have to trust that the process is going to work itself out, and that what's going to happen next that you're going to tell us about is how the right fit came into your life.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that go on in the background that you're not aware of, that they have family members, here in the US, or whatever, that they're trying to keep them close to. But then all of a sudden, we got a call saying, well, we have the possibility of a little boy, an 8-year-old. We were like, okay, yes, when can we meet them? Like, we're ready. At the time, James was living with his foster family for about 2.5 years at that time. And they were living about an hour and a half from our house. And so they said, contact the foster family, and maybe you guys can meet up at a park or something. And so you meet up just as, family, friends. And then we got to meet James for the first time. That moment, you're just like, okay, just come home with me now. And we're done with this thing. You can just come home.
Because your heart just opens up immediately, doesn't it?
Yeah, because you're so ready by that time, and you just want them in your home. But it was a great process. And because he also had a really great connection with the foster family. So, they wanted to kind of move this a little more slowly, but it didn't take long. We were actually allowed to take James on a family trip. We went to go see my dad, who lives in Kentucky on a farm. And I thought this would be really nice, And at that point, he still didn't know. that we were going to be his forever home. He just thought we were this, family that his family knew, and we wanted to take him on this great trip. So we ended up taking him on a 10-day trip to Kentucky. And when we got back, we were sitting in our house. He had to go back to his foster family the next day. And I kind of said to him, what did you think of the trip? Did you have a lot of fun? And he said, yeah, I had so much fun. And I said, well, what if we were your forever family? What if you lived with us forever? And he was like, yes, yes, I want to live with you forever
Oh.
and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And Dylan, I just looked at each other and we were just, kind of both teared up like, okay, this is it then.
Oh, what a moment that is.
Yeah, it
Gosh.
was really
Oh,
great. So
and
within 2 weeks of that time, he was moved in. Yeah. And then that whole process starts. But yeah, it was really fantastic.
so Chris, from start to finish, from the day you went to your first orientation meeting
Mhm.
until the day you adopted your son James, what was the time frame?
Okay. So just because COVID did actually prolong the adoption process by quite a bit because the courts were closed. So we started the training in October. That July is when James moved in with us. So that part of the process actually did take a little bit of time to finally find James and be matched up with him. And then he was fully adopted in May of 2020, this past May. So it should have happened like January, but because of COVID, it was prolonged a bit.
Our experience was from the day we went to our first orientation until the day that he came home to stay with us was 9 months exactly. So I like to say that was
Yeah.
that was our gestation period. And then for us, again, now he was a teenager, so he had so much say in the
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
process being a teenager. But for us, it was a year and a half total from the time we started the process till the adoption was actually completed. So it did not take long at all. But it is different depending on locations and just the process. And you
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
know. Something like COVID can hit.
Yeah.
Often kids from foster care are dealing with a variety of challenging emotional, educational, or physical challenges that require a lot of support and attention. And you sort of touched on how expanding your family with James did and has impacted your other children. But what about your marriage? How has that been to go through what is a very emotional process? How has this impacted your marriage?
So, I think with the addition of any child, whether you're having a birth child or you're adopting, you of course is going to affect your marriage. It's bringing another person into your home and adjusting everything. There's definitely a period of adjustment as far as how do we parent this new child who has had a lot of different experiences that, partially we know and partially we really don't know. And so it's getting on the same page with things like that. It's trusting that what you're doing is the best that you can do in that moment. And so that part of it actually brings you together. In our experience, that part did, because we were really able to start depending on each other, probably even more so than what we used to do with our birth children. It was kind of like, well, why didn't you do it that way? But now it was, I trust that you're going to do this the right way. And, you do develop just a more calm approach because you have to, because you don't know the experiences that this child has had, you have to approach everything much more calmly so that it doesn't trigger any difficulties in behavior. And so that approach, you do start to adopt that into how you approach your other children and how you approach each other. There is that side. Yes, it's stressful. There is an added stress. But like I said, had we chosen to just have another baby, it would have been really just as stressful, if not more, because it's a baby. And,
Yeah. There's
there's a lot
diapers.
more
There's diapers
sleepless
involved
nights.
with
And
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, do you guys have a little special, like, how do you get away together? How do you take those few moments to sort of separate from the kids a little bit and just connect with each other?
Yeah, we're not great at doing that yet, if I'm gonna be really honest. We're trying to implement like a weekly kind of date night so we can just get away because it does get overwhelming with 4 kids, regardless of whatever. And work and everything else. We are trying to get better at making sure that we make time for that because as you know, if you don't make the time for each other, it really just doesn't happen. And then you start to wonder why you're fighting so much. And so we are getting better at doing that. Just getting a babysitter and going out, just even for one night a week, has been a huge difference in just being able to talk about things and really not talk about our kids. To just literally talk about anything
Anything
else.
else?
Yeah. And I think I do that a lot with my friends too. I don't tend to go out with my friends who want to talk about home life because like I get enough of that. I need to vent about other things. I need to talk about other things and I think just psychologically that helps me to kind of separate. But as you know too, I'm a huge proponent of mindfulness. I do practice that literally every day. That helps me a lot with just being able to support James and my other 3 kids really, and it just with a different approach and to give myself even 10 minutes a day to just give myself some nourishment and understand that these struggles are temporary. Everything is temporary. And to really just form kind of a sense of gratitude around what life is bringing to me right now.
I like to ask our guests if they have any personal mantras that they live by to share with our listeners. And when I asked Chris for hers, that's sort of what she went to was not a statement per se, but more of a mantra belief practice that she calls mindfulness. And I think people are starting to hear that word being used more and more. So you're just saying that practicing mindfulness for yourself in your marriage and with all your kids helps you live each day fully and with purpose. How would you describe one mindfulness practice that you find is your go-to for you to get through each of your days?
There's different ways to practice mindfulness. You don't have to be this like Zen Buddhist monk. You don't have to sit down for 45 minutes in complete silence. It's really just about taking any activity that you already do and just becoming more aware of what you're doing in that moment. For me, a really big turning point was when COVID started because all 4 of my kids came home for homeschooling. And on top of 4 children homeschooling and my work, James also had, occupational therapy and speech therapy and all of these other things that, I had to be on top of that. And especially at the time, his processing he had massive difficulties with processing information. And so something that would normally take maybe 10 minutes, like sometimes not even, sometimes 2 minutes, like putting a sentence together, he really didn't have a grasp of how to do that. And so even something like that, something that you find to be really kind of frustrating and, one of kind of your triggers where it's like you're dreading that, because it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience, and you don't have that much. And so you start to develop a way of becoming more aware of what's going on inside that child's head or what's going inside your own head. Why are you resisting this so much? Why are you having these thoughts and feelings that are coming up for you? And so it's just really becoming aware instead of just kind of getting frustrated and saying, okay, screw it, we're not going to do this today. And you bring that in and it's like, it's a massive game changer. I am not someone who came from, super patient family or, and I myself was not a very patient person, but this allows me to just shift things just slightly enough that I can start to learn how to approach things differently and in just so much more of a beneficial way for myself and for my kids.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Just the slightest shift sometimes can change how the
Yes,
whole day goes, right?
absolutely.
Oh, that's
Absolutely.
awesome. Well, Chris, as you just demonstrated, you are an educator. You have a master's in education. You are an international speaker, neurodiversity consultant, certified mindfulness instructor, which we just got a little taste of, and the founder of LIV Consulting. You train teachers, professors, parents, and managers to become aware of what you call divergent talent and learning how to leverage it. So, first, can you explain to our listeners what you mean by neurodiversity and divergent thinking, which, to be honest, knowing what I know about it, probably can be applied to many kids who come from the foster care system?
Absolutely. Yeah. So neurodiversity is a term that was coined back in the 80s. And basically it's taking the word disability and just giving it a fresh face. And it's saying, okay, instead of constantly saying that it's the person who is disabled, what if we instead said, okay, we actually know scientifically that our brains are all different, and there are brains that are divergent from what we consider the norm. And so those are people that might have a diagnosis of ADHD or autism or dyslexia or anxiety or depression. And so their brain is going to view the world in a different way. And when you view the world in a different way because of sensory sensitivities or whatever it is, you need a different way of learning about the world. Part of what I do is training teachers and professors now, how to incorporate some of these strategies into their classroom. Because what we know is when we start to work with some of the strategies that work, let's say for autistic people, autistic college students, we know that most of those strategies also work for people with anxiety and people with ADHD and people with depression. And so we're opening this up to just get away from the traditional idea of learning and what that looks like. When you have a child who comes from a traumatic background, very often you will have learning differences. So there might be a reading based difficulty or math or ADHD is very often found. Dyslexia is, it's our number one reading based learning difference. But on top of that, you have anxiety and depression from having a lifetime of really difficult experiences. And so knowing about neurodiversity was a really great advantage to me because of some of the struggles he already had that I knew about, but so many of the struggles that came out that I didn't know about. It really helped me to understand how his brain works and how I can really motivate him to want to learn more.
That's incredible. And something you just said I want to touch on was they do a really great job when you adopt a child at giving you their history. I don't know about you, but I got like a cases full of of notes about our son's time through the system. But you're right. It doesn't always give you the complete picture or all the nuances of what that looks like, what that means, or all the experiences. They may not even know all the experiences that child had. So there is a bit of time where you're uncovering even more.
Yeah,
They do the
yeah.
best they can, though, where they give you as much information as they can. But there's always going to be more that comes out, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it comes up too because, some of the stuff that's come out is things that as he becomes more comfortable talking about his feelings and talking about his past, which he wasn't doing at his foster family, which I mean, he was there for 2.5 years. You would think that everything kind of came out, but it didn't. And when they become more comfortable, that's a really beautiful thing because yes,
Yeah.
you're getting more information that maybe is hard to hear, but you're that trusted person, you're that calm space for them, and that's amazing that you get to be that. That's the point of this.
You are the safest place that child maybe has ever had. That's
Yeah,
that's an
absolutely.
incredible it's an incredible moment when those revelations happen.
Hmm.
If anybody's hearing what Chris is saying about neurodiversity and divergent thinking, and you'd like to hear more about what she has to say, you can actually find her at chrisbrady.com. That's CRISBRADY.com. And if you go to Facebook and type in chrisbrady.com, you'll find her on Facebook as well. And she has great content on there that can give you some more insight into that thought process. So, how has your work as an educator been changed or impacted by James?
I got into mindfulness because of some college students. There was a certain college program that we were working on at the time, and a lot of anger issues were coming in, and we thought, okay, we're going to incorporate this with these other learning difficulties that they were having. But I didn't really understand how beautifully those two things go together until James. The processing was so difficult for him. And I don't know really if anyone had ever picked up on that, because he was very good at just not saying anything and pretending like he just couldn't speak when he could. And so people would kind of pass it off as, oh, he's a foster child and we don't want to push anything, and maybe he doesn't have the words for that. But I'm a firm believer that people have way more than what they're showing you. And so I would push him a little bit into, because I knew that there was more there, and that he was able to talk, and he just didn't want to, and he didn't know how to discuss his feelings. And when I brought in the mindfulness with it, because I have different things here at home that I use with my own kids just to kind of get us to talk about feelings. And he just really, it really opened up a lot for him, but for myself too, because I found that I was getting frustrated with, how long everything was taking. I mean, everything, the simplest of questions, like, would you like cereal today? That was like a 10-minute, we'd have to stand there and wait for that answer. And so that has just changed so much. I really just don't think I realized how well learning and understanding the awareness of your feelings and thoughts come into play, and how to get through those emotions first for the child before we can actually get them to learn anything. And that's what I needed to do with him, but I didn't understand how to do it yet. And that was what worked just amazingly well. So it's changed a lot. I'm doing that more so with my clients now, even older ones, who are adults, just helping with the emotional side of things first before we go to the ADHD part or the autism part, because we need to deal with that side first.
When you mentioned that about him taking 10 minutes to make a choice, that is something that we have really come across in our years of just, doing this. For people who are considering this, one of the things that gets taken away from children who go through the foster care system is choice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So many choices are taken out of their hands, from the clothes they wear to even what home they live in. And their choices are so limited. And so when they are finally in a place and a position where they're being given the freedom to start making choices, even the simplest choices seem overwhelming to them. But I gotta say, that's been one of the most beautiful things, is seeing our adult son learn that not only can he make choices, but that we trust him to make good choices, which is a very empowering thing. So when you said that, I'm like, yeah, I know that 10 minutes just to make a simple choice, but how amazing that that's what you've been able to give to him, is the freedom and the space to learn confidence to make choices. That's absolutely amazing.
That was a really good point. And I think I just wanted to add to that, because you're completely right about having choices taken away. And I think too, what that helps with as well is just showing them that they have other options. Because sometimes when they come in with behaviors that are hitting out or whatever it is, they're often really don't understand that there is another option in the behaving or responding in a different way, because just like you said, they don't even understand choice, let alone options in their behaviors, And so that's a really good point that you brought up.
Oh, I love being able to demonstrate a different way to kids. Isn't that what's amazing? It's good for us as adults, but it's amazing to be able to demonstrate that to kids. So as I said at the beginning, I really believe that military families make wonderful foster and adoptive families. So as we wrap it up today, Chris, why would you encourage any family, but military families specifically, to consider adoption of an older child from foster care, no matter where they're posted? Just speak from your heart about this.
Honestly, if you have the opportunity to do something like this, where it costs nothing, you don't have that barrier, you don't have the time barrier because it's much faster. It's something that it's going to change so much. And what really bothers me, I think, the most is that I often get the stigma, the assumption of, oh, that must have been so difficult. Yes, of course there are difficult times. You go into having a child of any kind knowing that this is going to be harder than what I have right now. I'm adding another person to my family. But that's not at all where you focus when you're doing this. And you're going to see those little things every day. And I think especially for military families, we're so understanding of the difficulties that people have transitioning from classroom to classroom or country to country. We know that this can be difficult on ourselves and our kids, and these kids have been transitioning frequently all their lives. It just makes sense to put them into a family who already understands some of the, okay, we need to prep them for this and this, because that's what we do for ourselves. Every time we move, we make sure that certain things are set in place, and we get it emotionally and psychologically, we get it. And so we're able to really help them through that even more. It just kind of gives this kind of overall sense of moving from one place to another is not a bad thing. That's the journey that most of us are choosing to do because we want to experience different places around the world, or different cultures or whatever it is. And showing them that that's a part of their life now too. And now we're going to show you how beautiful it is to move around and want to.
That's amazing. And it puts a whole different perspective on it for a kid who hasn't had that beautiful perspective.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
amazing. I like to say, if you have a room in your house where you throw all your junk and all your extra shoes and coats and all of that, if you throw away leftovers at the end of your meals, then you have the space and the room and the ability to open your home to a child. It's that simple. If you've got a little extra food, you got one extra room, there's a kid who could fill that space. So, Chris, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you to you and your husband and your kids for being willing to open your hearts and your family to a child who needed you all. And thank you for being willing to share your journey this far with us. You have certainly had an amazing OUTCAN experience.
Thank you so much for covering this topic. It doesn't get enough. And I think especially for older children, if you are able to adopt an older child, please do. There wasn't one child that was, a prospective adoption for us that we wouldn't have taken in a heartbeat. These are beautiful, beautiful children who really need a home.
They just need a chance.
Yeah.
Tune in next week when we hear from the Kingston family, who share their adoption story in part 2. Thank you for listening to the Voices of OUTCAN podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to hear when new episodes are released, and share with other military families and their supporters. Check out our Voices of OUTCAN podcast information and all of the other resources and supports offered by MFSUS on our CAF Connection web pages at cafconnection.ca/United States. To all of our Canadian military members and your families, we thank you for your service.